May 31st, 2009, Rio de Janeiro. 228 people packed their bags, kissed their families, and boarded a plane. They were going home. They never arrived. No Mayday call, no final transmission, no wreckage visible from the surface. For 2 years, the Atlantic Ocean kept its secret. What it eventually gave back, and what investigators found buried in the data, would change aviation forever. This is Air France Flight 447. The Airbus A330-200 was a machine built on trust. 18,000 flight hours. No major incidents. One of the most sophisticated passenger jets ever built. On the night of May 31st, it carried 228 lives from Rio de Janeiro toward Paris. A route Air France had flown so many times it had become almost mechanical. In the cockpit sat 3 pilots. Captain Marc Dubois had spent over 11,000 hours in the air. David Robert brought 6,600 more. The youngest of the 3, Pierre-Cédric Bonin, had logged roughly 2,900 hours, experienced enough to fly a long-haul crossing, but the least seasoned of the crew. For the first few hours, there was nothing. Meal service. Cabin lights dimmed. The quiet rhythm of a long overnight flight. Then the aircraft reached the equator, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a belt of towering storm cells stretching thousands of miles across the Atlantic. Pilots called it the ITCZ. They knew it. They planned for it. What they didn't plan for was what was about to happen inside the cockpit. At 1:55 in the morning, Captain Dubois did something perfectly routine. He left his seat to rest. On a transatlantic flight, crew rest rotations are standard, regulated, expected. He had no reason to believe the next 4 minutes would be the last of his life. The plane was steady, 35,000 feet, Mach 0.82, on schedule. At 2:08 a.m., the Atlantic reached up and touched the aircraft. Ice, not on the wings, not on the engines, on 2 small sensors on the nose of the plane, called pitot tubes, measuring nothing more exotic than airspeed. As they froze over, the autopilot made a rational, correct, catastrophic decision. It let go. It handed the aircraft to the pilots. And in the seconds that followed, the cockpit became a wall of noise. Alarms, disconnection warnings, system failures. The aircraft had dropped into what engineers call alternate law, a degraded mode where the computer's protections go dark and the pilots are truly on their own. 2 men, experienced but not for this, were now hand-flying a 230-ton aircraft through a black storm over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And one of them made a decision that doomed everyone on board. He pulled back. He pointed the nose of the aircraft toward the sky. High altitude, low speed, nose up. The physics were unforgiving. The airspeed bled away. The wings lost their grip on the air. And then the voice came. Stall, stall, stall. 1 minute and 38 seconds after the stall began, Captain Dubois burst back into the cockpit. He had been asleep. Now he was staring at an aircraft in free fall. Here is what no one in that cockpit understood until it was too late. Bonin had never stopped pulling back. On the Airbus A330, both pilots have their own side-stick controller. They feel nothing from each other's inputs. When Bonin pulled up and Robert pushed forward, the aircraft's computer did the math and split the difference. Going nowhere. Bonin thought he was saving the plane. He was killing it. The aircraft fell through the sky at 10,000 feet per minute. Nose up, engines running, falling. In the final moments, Robert's voice cut through the cockpit. Climb, climb, climb. Bonin answered quietly, but I've been pulling back the whole time. Silence. Then Dubois, the veteran, the captain, the man with 11,000 hours, said the last words he would ever speak in a cockpit. "We're going to crash. This can't be happening." At 2:14 a.m., Air France Flight 447 struck the surface of the Atlantic Ocean at nearly 11,000 feet per minute. 228 people died instantly. The aircraft disintegrated on impact and sank over 2 miles to the ocean floor, and the Atlantic closed over it. Silence. When Flight 447 failed to arrive in Paris, Air France knew within hours. The world knew by morning. But knowing and finding are very different things. The search that followed was unlike anything in aviation history, not because of what it found, but because of what it couldn't. For 2 years, the Atlantic gave up almost nothing. Surface debris appeared within days, seats, luggage. The heartbreaking evidence of 228 lives interrupted. But the black boxes, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder that held every answer had sunk to nearly 13,000 feet below the surface. Deeper than most submarines can dive. Darker than almost anywhere on Earth. 3 search operations were launched. 3 times the teams came home empty. Then, in April 2011, a new team tried a new search grid. On April 3rd, an autonomous submarine, moving silently through the dark, found the wreckage, the fuselage, the seats, the belongings of 228 people scattered across the ocean floor as if time had stopped, and the black boxes, intact, sitting in the silt. They had been waiting there for 23 months. They were ready to talk. The BEA's final report, released in July 2012, didn't bury the truth. It published it. 4 findings, each one damning. Together, they painted a picture not just of one flight, but of a systemic failure hiding inside the safest era of aviation in human history. The pitot tubes, known to ice, known to fail. A replacement program existed. It simply hadn't reached Flight 447 in time. The training. Modern commercial pilots fly with automation so sophisticated, so reliable, that hand flying at cruise altitude, actually gripping the controls and flying the plane, is something many do for only minutes per year. When the automation let go, the muscle memory wasn't there, the dependency. The report named it plainly. Pilots had come to trust the machine more than themselves. And on the night of May 31st, the machine said, "Your turn." The communication. In the most critical 4 minutes of their lives, 3 trained professionals never clearly established who was in command. 2 pilots pushed and pulled against each other, cancelling each other out, while a third arrived too late to understand what he was walking into. The aviation world listened. Pitot tubes were replaced across the global A330 fleet. Training programs were rewritten. Simulators were reprogrammed to practice the exact scenario that killed 228 people. But one question remains open. The side sticks. 2 controllers with no physical connection. No way to feel what the other pilot is doing. Airbus studied it, debated it, and to this day, the A330 still flies with the same design. Flight 447 didn't fall from the sky because something broke. The engines ran perfectly. The wings held. The instruments, most of them, functioned exactly as designed. It fell because of 4 minutes. 4 minutes in which frozen sensors, inadequate training, automation that had done its job too well for too long, and a fatal miscommunication between 3 human beings all arrived at the same moment over the same stretch of ocean. 228 people died in those 4 minutes. For 2 years, their families stood at the edge of an answer that the Atlantic refused to give. When it finally came, when the black boxes were pulled from 13,000 feet of darkness and the data was read, what the world received was not just the story of one flight. It was a mirror held up to an entire industry that had built such remarkable machines that it had quietly, gradually, forgotten how to fly without them. Aviation is safer today because of what happened to Flight 447. 228 people died so that the rest of us could live. Not knowingly, not willingly, but that is what their deaths became. That is what every tragedy in this series becomes. Something that teaches us, something that changes us, something we must never forget. If this video mattered to you, subscribe to Planes Gone Wrong. We cover the investigations, the decisions, and the stories behind some of history's most significant disasters. See you in the next one.